Welcome into Texans Today, everybody. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and as Senior Bowl week is wrapping up, I'm going to let you know who the Texans should keep an eye out on going forward into the 2024 NFL Draft. All the seniors this year from college, they participated in Mobile, Alabama, showing out their skills in front of position coaches from every single team in the National Football League. So, we had a couple, eyes on the ground down there in Mobile, Alabama. So I'll let you know who the Texans should be keeping an eye out for this draft season. But first, before we get going, my bosses were like, do people really want to talk about Senior Bowl standouts? Do people really want to, start talking about the draft already before free agency? I said, of course they do. So help me prove them right. They said, hey, if you get 500 likes on this video, we can keep on doing draft content throughout all the offseason leading up into the draft. So if you want more Texans draft content, go down and hit that like button right now, 500, and let me stick it to my bosses and tell them, hey, everybody wants to talk about the Texans draft coming up. Now, without further ado, let's get right into it with the Senior Bowl standouts. First off, Ladd McConkey, wide receiver out of UGA. The Bulldogs. Ladd McConkey, 6 foot, 185 pounds. Pretty decent year this past year. A little bit better in 2022, but he has been tearing it up at the Senior Bowl. And now, don't get me wrong, you can't take too much stock into it because it's just, one-on-ones, reps like in practice, 7-on-7. You're not actually getting hit. But Ladd McConkey looked very good. His route running, very crisp, speedy wide receiver out of Georgia. Somebody who the Texans could look at in, the mid-rounds if they're looking for a wide receiver. Just like this next guy, Malachi Corley, another wide receiver out of Western Kentucky. The wide receiver calls himself the Yak King. So, obviously, no shortage of self-confidence in this young man right here, but there's a reason why he calls himself the Yak King, and it's because he does get a lot of yards after the catch. 79 receptions, 984 yards, and a long as 75 this season. 11 touchdowns on the year for Malachi Corley. Another guy who I think he goes higher than Ladd McConkey. He's a top 50 prospect according to Daniel Jeremiah, but does he go in the middle of round 2? Maybe slides to round 3. Another guy, if the Texans are looking to add to that wide receiver core, he could be an interesting option in the middle rounds of this year's draft. One guy that I really impressed me, all the footage that I've seen of, is MarShawn Lloyd, running back out of USC. He really impressed. He was the best running back according to multiple sources at the Senior Bowl this year. And, smaller guy, 5'9", 210, but he's kind of built. He's a stocky 5'9", 116 carries, 820 yards, 9 touchdowns this year for the University of Southern California, and an offense where they like to air the ball out a lot with Caleb Williams. So, MarShawn Lloyd, if he's on the board in those middle rounds, which I think he should be, I've gone on record saying I don't know if a running back goes in the first round this year. Could the Texans get a guy like MarShawn Lloyd in, the 4th, 5th, 6th round? Possibly. If he's on the board in those later rounds, I wouldn't mind the Texans taking a flyer on the USC running back. Now, this next guy, I think he could be a name that you really have to look out for because I think he fits exactly what the Texans need this offseason, especially if they don't address it in free agency. But let me know, what is the Texans' biggest need on offense this offseason? Let me know down in the comment section. This is going to be the pinned comment on today's video. So, you hit with the YouTube ad break, perfect timing. Let me know, what is the biggest need this offseason for the Texans on the offensive side of the football? This next guy, Theo Johnson, tight end out of Penn State. A lot of good things coming out of the Senior Bowl for Theo Johnson. Really fast, very good catcher of the football. Obviously, that Penn State offense really didn't get going this year, but a lot of scouts are saying Theo Johnson, after Brock Bowers, after Jatavion Sanders, he's the next guy up. And especially, like I alluded to earlier, if the Texans don't re-sign Dalton Schultz or they don't sign a tight end in free agency, expect them to draft a tight end in rounds 2 through 4. Theo Johnson could fit the mold of what the Texans want to do. And I think it would be really interesting if the Texans were able to get Theo Johnson in this year's NFL draft and kind of pair him with a Brevin Jordan, have a 1-2 combo there at tight end. He's 6'6", 264 pounds, really interesting prospect for the Texans to look out going into draft season. This next guy is an absolute unit. Taliese Fuaga, offensive lineman from Oregon State, a mountain of a man, 6'6", 334 pounds, has played guard, played a lot of tackle at Oregon State. 0 sacks this season, 2 hits, 10 hurries, with an offense that threw the ball a lot with DJ Uiagalelei. Taliese Fuaga could be an interesting name. Now, I do think he goes middle of round 1 into round 2. So if the Texans want to get Fuaga, they're going to more than likely have to draft him in the first round. But I've said multiple times, I don't mind the Texans drafting offensive linemen early, because if you watch any of our free agency shows, there's no free agent offensive lineman that really jump off the board that you're like, oh, we need to get this guy. So your best opportunity to upgrade at the offensive line is through the draft. If I was a GM, I would draft an offensive lineman in the first 2 rounds almost every single year, because that is the one position that once you get a guy, you lock him up, and you lock him up for a long time. Now, Taliese Fuaga could be one of those guys. Now, here's some of the honorable mentions on offense that I heard as well did very well this week. Kamani Vidal, another running back from Troy, smaller in stature, but apparently really, really explosive out of the backfield as a runner and the catcher of the football. Ray Davis, running back from Kentucky, had some flashes as well. Roman Wilson, wide receiver from Michigan, obviously on that championship team, has showed some pedigree and showed the reason why he was a wide receiver on a championship team this past season. Javon Baker, wide receiver out of UCF, has had some flashes as well, shown a couple glimpses of why he could be a mid-round pick. Luke McCaffrey. Now, I'm not sure if Luke McCaffrey is on here for, name value, or people are just hyping him up because Christian McCaffrey's in the Super Bowl, but word is that he's done really well in Mobile this past week. Christian Haynes, the offensive lineman from UConn, has looked really good, more of a guard-type player. Jackson Powers Johnson, a center that has apparently been really, really good. And Tyler Guyton, tackle from OU. Now, coming up are some defensive standouts from the Senior Bowl who looked really good this past week on the defensive side of the football. But before we get into that, got to show some love to our friends over at Fanatics. They're trying to hook you up, get you fitted for next season, rooting on your Houston Texans with these sick jerseys. They have every jersey that you need. They have the Stingley. They have the Stroud Color Rush. They even have the Battle Red Will Anderson. All you got to do, go to chatsports.com/Texans jersey. That's going to be in the comments and the description of this video. That lets them know that we sent you over to Fanatics. Use that link and get any of these jerseys this offseason going into next year. I might want to get a Tank Dell. I still need to get my CJ Stroud jersey. So I'm going to be going to chatsports.com/Texans jersey, and so should you. Now, Quinyon Mitchell, cornerback from Toledo. He's been a really, really, one of the guys who stood out at the cornerback position. Obviously, it's a lot harder to play the cornerback position whenever you're not able to really put your hands on a guy, whenever you're really not able to be physical with a guy. But a guy like Quinyon Mitchell, 6 foot, 196 pounds, has really showed out this past year out of a smaller school in Toledo. And, early in the draft process, it happens with a lot of guys. You're like, oh, Quinyon Mitchell, really good prospect. You can get him in the 3rd, 4th round, maybe late 2nd round. I don't think that's the case anymore for Quinyon Mitchell. I really think he's found himself to where he's a late day 1, early day 2 guy now. So I don't know if the Texans necessarily go after Mitchell. Depending on what they do in free agency, if they don't get another corner opposite of Derek Stingley, this could be an option for their 1st round pick. Or if they maybe want to trade back in the 1st round a couple picks and still pick up Quinyon Mitchell, I wouldn't mind that either. This next guy, I have a man crush on him. I'm not going to lie. This is my man crush for this year's draft, and his name is T'Vondre Sweat out of the University of Texas. A big old boy from Huntsville, 6'4", 262 pounds, 45 tackles, 2 sacks. You're like, wow, he didn't do a lot this season. He plays the nose tackle spot, so you're not going to really pad your stats. You're not going to really get a ton of sacks, get a ton of tackles, but he is an immovable object whenever he's lined up in front of the center. And that's what the Texans need to let pass rushers like Will Anderson get after the quarterback. I would really like the idea of getting T'Vondre Sweat in the 1st round if he's still there for the Houston Texans. He's rising up boards every single day. And I think it's going to go even more as he goes through the draft process and the combine. T'Vondre Sweat, a guy that you really need to keep an eye out for if you're the Houston Texans, in a huge area of need for the Texans this offseason, which is defensive tackle. Now, name one draft prospect you want the Texans to draft this year. One of my guys is T'Vondre Sweat, but maybe he's not on the list because he's not in the Senior Bowl, but he could be another player. Just let me know down in the comment section. I want to kind of get a list of guys that Texans fans are really excited about, that are interested in, so I can do some more research on those guys leading up to the 2024 NFL Draft. So it doesn't have to be one name. You could be an overachiever, get a gold star, write 2, write 3 names if you really want to. But let me know, who do you want the Texans to draft this year in the 2024 NFL Draft? Now, going on to our next guy, it's another defensive tackle, Braden Fiske out of Florida State. He's shown a lot of promise in the Senior Bowl this week, and I really think, he's a guy day 2, day 3. If you don't go defensive tackle in the first round, he could be there in the second round for you and would be a really good option. 6'5", 297 pounds, a monster of a man. Played really well on the undefeated Florida State team that eventually lost in their bowl game, if you really want to call it that. It was like a scrimmage because half the guys sat out. But Braden Fiske played very well on a Seminoles defense that didn't lose a game in the regular season. So Braden Fiske, another guy I really think the Texans should look at in this year's draft. Next guy up, Darius Robinson, defensive lineman out of Missouri. Now, this Missouri team was good this year, and he was a big reason why. 6'5", 296 pounds. This is a guy who plays, he plays defensive tackle, but in a 4-3, he's not going to be your nose, per se. He's shaded over the guard, which, if you don't know, the 3 technique is like on the outside of the guard, but kind of between the guard and the tackle. This is where I see Darius Robinson really thriving in the NFL. A bigger guy, but I think can get some pressure from that inside position, especially on pass rush downs like 3rd and long, 2nd and long. I think Darius Robinson could thrive in those roles, and that's why another guy I think the Texans should really keep an eye out for. I think this is a second-round guy. If he's still on the board in the second round, I would not mind whatsoever for the Houston Texans taking Darius Robinson. And lastly, Payton Wilson, linebacker from NC State, from multiple sources has been the best linebacker at the Senior Bowl this year and put up some gaudy numbers at NC State this past season. 138 tackles, 6 sacks, and 1 forced fumble. A bigger linebacker, too. He's 6'4", 238. I really, really like what Payton Wilson brings to the table. And depending on what the Texans do in free agency, just like a lot of these guys, if they don't re-sign Blake Cashman, if they don't re-sign Denzel Perryman, they will have a need at linebacker. I'm really hoping that they do re-sign one of those guys. But Payton Wilson wouldn't be a bad option. Another guy in the second, or maybe he slips to you in the 3rd round. But if Payton Wilson is on the board, I wouldn't mind that pick for your Houston Texans. Here's some honorable mentions from the Senior Bowl this week on the defensive side. Cam Hart, cornerback from Notre Dame. Jarvis Brownlee, another cornerback from Louisville. Adisa Isaac, defensive end from Penn State. Javon Bullard, safety from Georgia. And I always mess up his name. I'm just going to call him Say that again? Laiatu Latu. Producer extraordinaire Cullen on the 1s and 2s giving me the pronunciation for that one. But Laiatu Latu from UCLA. He honestly could have been one of my standouts from the Senior Bowl that the Texans should look at. But I think he goes in round 1, and I don't necessarily know if he even makes it to the Texans' first-round pick. So he goes on my honorable mentions for this video. That's all I have for you today. If you have any draft guys that I really need to look at, if you have anything that you're like, Jeremy, you messed up, you didn't mention this guy, you need to look at this guy for the draft this year, hit me up on Twitter, at Jeremy Chuggs. You can DM me, you can tweet at me, and let me know, hey, Jeremy, you need to look at this guy, talk about this guy on Texans Today, because, hey, this is called Chat Sports, it's not Jeremy Sports. So I really want to hear from you folks at home. Let me know, what are you thinking around the Texans draft this year? And as always, hit that sub button. We are the fastest growing Texans channel on YouTube. There is no doubt about that. Free Texans videos every single day. So go down and hit that sub button or go to youtube.com/TexansTV. Or if you have any friends, any family members that are Texans fans that don't know about the channel, shoot them over a video. Say, hey, check out this crazy dude named Chuggs. He's bringing you Texans videos every single day.